This should be psi. ESP, psi, RV provide some excellent white crows still, and the court is out on those. They are not inconclusive in this case. Okay, so physicalism's Achilles heel is causal closure of the physical domain. What this means is, and this is a premise that physicalists assume, this is not something you can prove. It's assumed, and it's based on a lot of the physical evidence, but there's still plenty of evidence to be found. So no causal influences can enter from outside the physical domain. And no causal influences can exit the physical domain to re-enter elsewhere. What that means is, you have the physical universe. That's all there is. That's the basic premise of physicalism. The physical universe is all there is. Nothing can come in from outside to affect the physical universe. If it did, that would make it, by certain definition, non-physical. Okay? And so that's excluded. You also can't have something go from inside, erupt to the outside, and erupt back into the inside. You can't have a causal force do that either. That violates closure. And the whole reason is because there's nominally nothing outside the physical universe for that to go into. And so they basically postulate that there is nothing outside the physical universe, that you cannot go outside the physical universe. You can't bring anything in from the outside. Okay? But that is an assumption. And so that's the weak point of physicalism. If you can show that closure is false, you falsify physicalism, and you allow the field to be open for all kinds of things, including psi, ESP, whatever. Okay? So let's talk about how this all works. So I'm going to get into causation a little bit here, and I hope this will be a user-friendly way. If not, you can all pass out or throw things at me. But anyway, there's three kinds of causal chains that I'm going to talk about. One is your standard, normal, usual causal chain, cause and effect, deterministic sort of process. This consists of a series of sequential steps that are causally relevant. Okay? You can trace this backwards from a terminal event to the ancestor event. And in fact, you can continue to trace it even further back from the ancestor event. That's your standard thing. You can trace it all the way back to the Big Bang, assuming the Big Bang really happened. Okay? That's your standard causal chain. So it goes like this. And by the way, this illustrates an actual family incident that happened many years ago. And the boy that's implicated in this was about 5 at the time, and he's now in the room at 27, so he'll get a real thrill out of this, I'm sure. At least this is how the story was told to me. I found out later it may not be quite accurate. Okay, so our terminating event is a lamp striking the floor and shattering. The boy has bumped the lamp, which is what causes it to fall. The dog bumps the boy, which causes him to bump the lamp. The explosion startles the dog. Okay. A casserole dish explodes, which is the explosion that startles the dog that caused the boy to bump the lamp, that caused the lamp to hit the floor, right? And the babysitter puts the casserole dish on the stove, contrary to instructions, in which he was supposed to put the ravioli in the casserole dish and put it in the oven. He puts it on the stovetop instead and turns it on high. Very interesting chain of events, quite plausible. Turned out to be false, but we won't go there, okay? Okay, so this is a standard causal chain. You see how we chase that backwards, okay? And for those of you who can't follow the diagrams, I have it linearly here, but I will only come back there, okay? All right. So the next one, and now this is terminology I've sort of invented. There may be other similar concepts that have different terminology, but capture the same thing. That's fine for here, okay? A truncated causal chain is one that violates closure, okay? It's a series of sequential, causally relevant steps. You can trace it backwards from the terminal event, but at some point you discover the causal chain just sort of materialized in thin air and began from there. That's why I call it truncated. You don't have a genealogy. You can't trace its ancestry back past a certain point. Okay? And so our causal chain diagram goes something like this. Lamp strikes the floor and shatters. The boy bumps the lamp. The dog bumps the boy. A screaming troll startles the dog. The screaming troll appears out of nowhere, and we have no idea where the troll came from. Okay? That's a truncated causal chain. You have this sudden appearance, which some might attribute to supernatural or non-physical or whatever. Okay? And again, here's the linear thing. All right? Good. So now here's the third one. This is the intermittently truncated causal chain. See, when you get into philosophy, you've got to be able to handle these terms, right? And the longer you can make them, the better your PhD is. Okay. Intermittently truncated causal chain, series of sequentially causally relevant steps, just like the others. You can trace it backwards from a terminal event to a sudden eruption into the physical domain, but the further thing is you know what its ancestral originating event is. Okay. So I'm going to illustrate it. This one's a bit more complicated. I hope this makes sense to you. Okay, we've got the lamp on the floor. The boy hits the lamp. The dog hits the boy. The screaming troll scares the dog. The screaming troll appears out of nowhere. The troll re-enters the physical domain from a previous exit out of the physical domain, at which point the screaming troll disappears. Explosion startles the family troll. That's how you got him in the first place. He was part of your pet menagerie, okay? The casserole dish explodes, and the babysitter puts the casserole dish on the stove, okay? Now here's the whole thing. Are you overwhelmed? But you get the idea. Now it's time for the laser pointer, okay? Casserole dish. That's a physical event. Casserole dish explodes. That's a physical event. The explosion startles the troll. That also is a physical event. The troll screams, but he disappears. That then goes outside of the physical domain, okay? He's floating around somewhere outside we don't care where he goes outside the physical domain. He's out there somewhere, right? But then he pops back in, and then he scares the dog and the boy and the lamp and the floor, and then that's a physical again. So you have this intermediate section here that isn't within the physical domain. And that is very problematic for physicalism if you can demonstrate an intermittent truncated causal chain. Okay? So, there we are linearly again. So, here are some examples, excuse me, of truncated causal chains. Apparitions, mediumship, spontaneous psi, certain cases, there's arguments here that could be made. And interestingly, the qualia consciousness argument. Because the qualia, if qualia are non-physical, as the argument goes, then we don't know where they come from. So that's a truncated causal chain. Now here's some examples of ITCCS. The staring and other distance mental influence kinds of experiments. Okay, in a staring experiment, you have someone who places intentionality on another person through some intermediary means so that the subject doesn't know they're being stared at. Okay, so that part of it's known, that's physically known. Then the person has a feeling, either has the feeling of being stared at and indicates it, or autonomic responses indicate there's some kind of attention being placed on that person. But in a separate room or separate building or whatever, there is a big hole in the causation between the staring and the perception of being stared at. And that is your intermittent passage through the non-physical domain, whatever that might be. Gonsfeld is an example of that. Presentiment experiments that Dean Radin has done a lot of are like that. Remote viewing is like that, particularly associative remote viewing. In remote viewing, you have a spatial interrupt, okay? The viewer is in a place, sitting down, given a coordinate or a tasking number, writes down, gets the perceptions. The viewer is known, location and tasking is known. The target is known to everybody but the viewer, presumably. Well, and whoever's associated with the viewer, it's double blind, okay? But how the information gets from here to here is completely unknown. And so you have an intermittently truncated causal chain, all right? Associative remote viewing is both space and time. It's a very powerful paradigm, actually, for trying to establish the reality of psi and ESP kinds of effects. Dowsing certain modes, and there are plenty of others, okay? Now here's both TCCs and ITCs violate the closure principle. How am I on time? I haven't been looking. Okay. We may be good then. Okay. Both of them violate the closure principle, but TCCs are not sufficiently convincing. It's because you don't know where they start. And the physicalists get by the consciousness argument by saying this. Okay, we don't know why you have the feel you do when you see the color red, or you feel warm sensation on your arm, or whatever. We don't know why. But you can't show us where it comes from, and we have very good confidence that neuroscience will eventually be able to explain it. And so they can say, we think there's a physical explanation. We don't know what it is, but we think there is, okay? And anytime you have a TCC and you don't know what the origin is, it's very easy to dismiss